Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland, so welcome back to my channel once more. So in this video I'm commenting on Finland being let into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So NATO goes back to 1949 and it's various countries on both sides of the North Atlantic that set it up to prevent Soviet aggression. So it's got the word Atlantic in the middle because it's got Canada and the USA and various European countries, France, the United Kingdom, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Denmark, Norway. Won't list them all, but since the end of the Soviet Union, for a lot of former communist countries joined, like Romania and Bulgaria. One of NATO's major achievements in the 1950s was to get both Greece and Turkey to join, despite them being at daggers drawn over Cyprus and other issues. But they both were worried about Soviet invasion, because, of course, Turkey then bordered the then Soviet Union, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. And Greece was then the Mediterranean, had a considerable communist party, which started a civil war after the Second World War, was defeated, but they're worried about more attempts. But since the end of the Soviet era, which other former communist countries have joined? Well, Albania's in it. I think Montenegro's trying to join it. Poland joined it because, of course, they've been invaded and oppressed by Russia horrifically a few times. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, former Soviet republics have joined it. Georgia wants to join it. They're not been allowed in yet. Some people in Moldova do, but that's not the official position of the Moldovan government. The Czech Republic and Slovakia have joined it. And having former Soviet countries in it has been vital because their Soviet-era equipment can be handed on to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians know how to use these MiGs and so on because they've already been trained on them. MiGs are those jets, as in designed by Mr. Mikoyan, an Armenian aeronautical engineer, the brother of Anastas Mikoyan, the sometime Soviet head of state. And then Finland, remember, was on the German side in the Second World War. That was because the Soviets had invaded them in 1939, claiming some of their territory, having finished communists, supposedly requesting that Stalin extend his genocidal regime to Finland. The Soviets bombarded one of their own villages to kill their own civilians, to blame it on the Finns, something which was proven, came to light in the early 90s when the archives were opened. It's just the kind of thing that the Putin regime does today. And so Finland refused to give in to threats, was invaded. The Soviet army performed abysmally. The Red Army lost a lot of troops, but eventually, sheer weight of numbers told, if you outnumber your enemy 10-1, well, it's difficult even for the best enemy to defeat you. And the Reds eventually prevailed, and the Soviets had to hand over some of the Karelian isthmus, and that was it. But then when the Third Reich attacked the Soviet Union, the Third Reich said to General Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim, who was the president of Finland, would you like to regain your lost territories? Of course you would. So he joined in, and then some success. But by 1944, it was blatant that the Axis was losing. So the Finns, they concluded a separate peace with the Soviet Union. They didn't have to give up much land, but there were various clauses in that. Amongst the terms were Finland had to be neutral, could never form any military alliance. The Finnish military was limited to a certain size. And that's one of the reasons why the Finnish armed forces are superb. They cannot be big, but they can be excellent, have state-of-the-art equipment. So they've got excellent equipment. They already arranged interoperability with NATO. And in order to earn their way into NATO, they've given a lot of high-quality equipment to the Ukrainians. They wanted to join because, Putin wants to rebuild the Russian Empire, and Vladimir Zhirinovsky now dead, so they should take back Alaska. Putin himself said that, Kazakhstan is illegitimate, has no history of statehood. Ergo, the Soviet Union could invade it, can take over at least some of Kazakhstan, maybe all of it. And there are other ultra-nationalist Russian politicians who've called for that. Russian state propaganda says that Russophones are oppressed in Moldova, that they should annex Moldova, and so on. They're already illegally occupying some of Moldova anyway. Transnistria already been illegally occupying some of Georgia for over 30 years, in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and so on. And they've invaded Ukraine, despite Putin saying at the outset they never want to claim an inch of Ukraine. They've now attempted to annex 5 districts of Ukraine, carried out numerous huge-scale atrocities there. So Ukraine would not be the last victim, and on and on and on. And the Poles know that they could be the next on the hit list. The Finns, obviously, they border Russia with 140 million people against Finland's 5 million people. no matter how outstanding the Finnish military, they wouldn't be able to stand up the Russians when they're so heavily outnumbered. Obviously, the heroism of the Ukrainians, they're giving the Russians better than they get, and despite being outnumbered 3.5 to 1 in population, the Ukrainians are holding on, but they're getting increasingly sophisticated armaments. So Finland has decided to join. Now, of course, this has provoked a tantrum from Moscow saying, oh, this is Russophobic hysteria. Well, they're not anti-Russian. They had actually very cordial relations with Russia for a long time. And they haven't taken down the Russian era architecture and things like that. It's not Russophobic not to want to be invaded. It's not Russophobic not to want to suffer the massacre of your civilians, just as Putin has visited mass murder upon civilians in Ukraine. And there's no hysteria. This is actually a reasonable and measured response to Russians' hyper-aggression, to its terrorism all around the globe, murdering foreign civilians abroad, such as the poor woman murdered in Salisbury when they're trying to kill Sergei Skripalski. They didn't manage to kill him. Alexander Litvinenko, numerous other Russian dissidents, an incredible number of Russian businessmen have died in mysterious circumstances as war began, at home and abroad in countries such as India. So Finland is actually breaking the treaty it signed with the Soviet Union, and as Russia would like to remind us, it's the principal successor state there too. But they might say, well, he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. We're absolved from that obligation because of your hyper-aggression. Finland, of course, was part of the Russian Empire for a century, so it could easily be invaded. Now, they've got a 1,340-kilometer border with Russia. Now, this is a headache for Russia because Russia didn't have to worry about that border for decades. It had to be very lightly guarded. But now they do, because troops from other NATO countries can be put in there, nuclear weapons can be put in there, and that's somewhere else they have to try and guard. And obviously, the flying time from the Finnish border to St. Petersburg for a nuclear weapon would be a matter of seconds. To all the way to Moscow, about 2 minutes. So there's no way they'd be able to shoot that down. All right, it doesn't really change things. NATO could already put them in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, but they haven't done so far as I know. So Russia said, well, they'll send more troops to protect this northwestern frontier, but they don't have any more troops. They say over 90% of the troops are already engaged in Ukraine. So these are yet more empty threats. Now, because Turkey finally voted that Finland be permitted to join. Remember, there are 30 NATO member states, and one can only be admitted to NATO if all 30 approve. So the Turks, they remove their threat of veto. Sweden is still trying to get in, but they host some Kurdish exile organizations, which Turkey brands terrorists. So Sweden has tried to negotiate with the Turks over this. It's not going anywhere. The Swedish man burnt a Quran last year. And so the Turkish government is very offended by what this Swede did, but Sweden says we're a free country, people are allowed to do these things. So far, the fly in the ointment is Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he's a rock in the road. He shan't permit the Swedes to join. Could he be inveigled into doing so? They might have to expel some of the Kurdish organizations. Now remember, Turkey's got a better relationship with Russia than any other NATO country does, which is why maybe at Russia's request, they're deciding to block this one so far. So it's definitely a security problem for Russia, but they brought it on themselves. It shows how this has backfired. The counterproductivity of this war is blatant. It's brought NATO closer. Ukraine was not a NATO member. Nobody says it's going to be a NATO member anytime soon because Russia's illegally occupying some of its land. But he has brought another NATO country to his border. Thanks for watching. Bye.